Free.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Lisa Early and I'm Suzanne's daughter. And so I'm going to be interviewing my mom today. And then at the end of the interview, we'll have probably 20 minutes or so for questions. And you guys can just put your questions into the chat box and I will read them out to the group. And then my mom will answer them, okay? Thank you so much, by the way, we really appreciate. And that's my friend Brenda on the bottom there who just chimed in. Hey, Brenda. So let's get started. So that's my mom, Suzanne, up in the top right corner, at least on my screen. She's in the top right corner there. And Mom, my first question for you, I just want to know a little bit more about your own, your parents, let's start with your dad. So who was your dad? What was his name? When was he born? Where was he born? And talk about his family a little. How many brothers and sisters he had?
Okay, my father's name was Marek Shmayuk, which is difficult for Americans to pronounce, but anyway, he was born in 1893, and he was a physician. He studied at the University of Vienna right after World War I. And he went back to Poland, which became Poland after World War I. It had been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but after World War I, it was returned to Poland. And he went back to his hometown to practice medicine. And he was practicing for many, many years there, and his family had lived in that town for many, many years, for many generations. He was one of 7 children, and he was the middle child, and apparently he was the brightest of the crew there, so they decided that he was going to be a doctor. So that's how the family helped him to become a physician, and he actually promised his parents that he would provide dowries for his sisters. He had 3 sisters, I think, let me see, 4 sisters. There were 4 girls and 3 boys in the family, that because they helped him to become a physician, that he would provide them with dowries. In those days, you had to have a dowry to get married. So for that reason, he got married quite late. And my mother was from a different city, but one of my mother's sisters had been a nurse in Vienna, and she had met my father there, and she was the one who introduced my father and my mother. And my mother was highly educated. She was born in 1906, but she had a PhD in Polish literature. And for that generation, it's quite a feat. Anyway, Jewish young women from a lot of families were quite educated. My mother's friends were attorneys and teachers. My mother was a teacher as well. Any other? Yeah.
And how many brothers and sisters did your mother have?
My mother came from 7 also, and she was the youngest. And her mother always used to tell her, and she also, by the way, they escaped to Vienna during World War I. The whole family went to Vienna because they were afraid of Russians. So they all went to Vienna, and my grandfather, my mother's father, died of the flu, of the Spanish influenza in Vienna. And he left his wife with 7 children. But being that my mother was the youngest, she was 6 years old when her father died. But there were older brothers and sisters, of course, and they all went back after World War I, back to Poland. And it was a city called Stanislavov, which was much larger than the city that my father practiced in. And my mother always used to say, being the baby of the family, her brothers used to pay her so she would allow them to kiss her. She was very spoiled by everybody, and her mother never let her go into the kitchen. She used to say, "You go study and play the piano. There's no time for you to be in the kitchen." Subsequently, when she married my father, she didn't know how to boil water. So, but that was okay, it worked out okay, because there was plenty of help in the kitchen. So she managed all right, she managed fine. She was always interested in intellectual pursuits rather than, culinary pursuits, let's put it this way. So we had a very good life. We really did. My father was busy with his practice, my mother with her friends and her piano and her teaching. She was teaching also. And we lived very well till Hitler walked. Well, first we were occupied by
Well,
the
when
Russians.
were you born? Talk about when you were born.
In 1937.
1937?
Yes, I'm 83.
And try to go back in your mind. Okay, so you were born in a town in Poland called Zbaraj, right?
Well, actually, I was
You were
born in
in
my mother's
Stanislav.
hometown. In my
Yes.
mother's hometown, Stanislava, but of course we went back to Spanish, yes.
So tell people what it was like, this is before the war, what this town looked like, what did the buildings look like, the roads look like, when you wanted to get food, where did you go? What did it look like? Try to paint a picture for everybody of what Zbaraj looked like when you were little, before the war.
You're talking about, when it was very small. All I
Yes.
remember, really, I have snatches of memory because I was very young. It was a small town. It was a historic town in Poland. It had a royal castle there, so it was a well-known town, even though it was small. Most of the roads were not paved. As a matter of fact, nobody had a car there. My father had a phone, but he was the only number there, so I don't know who called him. His patients came at all hours. They would knock on the door in the middle of the night to pick him up because a baby was being born. And he was like a Dr. Welby there. He did everything. He delivered babies, he pulled teeth, he did everything. And he was very respected in the town and very much loved. And I remember we had a lot of help in the house. As a matter of fact, I was a very poor eater. And I was an only child, by the way. I was a very poor eater, and they're always worried about my eating. And I remember my father coming in from the office every day with the first question was, did she eat? So anyway, they decided to hire a specially trained nursemaid from Germany to come to Zbaraj, Poland, to teach me how to eat. I mean, this is ridiculous right now when you think about it, but it's the truth. And so I started eating with her. And once my uncle, one of my father's brothers, the oldest brother, was watching from the corner of the room. And he realized that every time she put food in my mouth, she pinched me. Oh, I had to swallow the food. Well, let me tell you, she was back on the train the next day back to Germany. And anyway, by then Russians came in. It was during the Hitler Pact.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about, so you were born in 1937. So then what was happening in the world around that time, especially around Poland, with the war starting and all that? What was going on? And how did it affect the town you lived in Poland?
Well, I know that my father had a visa to come to the United States in 1933. Now, this was already big time in Germany. There were tremendous anti-Semitism, and people were leaving Germany. But my father made a mistake, of course, felt that being in a small town in Poland, somewhere way out of Germany, they would never be bothered there. Well, of course, he was wrong, because after Hitler marched into Poland in September 1939, before you knew it, the Russians went back to Russia. And because we were in the part of
the Hitler, the Russian Pact, the Germany-Russian Pact? What was that?
Yeah, they split up Poland into two sections. One was Russian, which is where we were. We were occupied by the Russians. I think it must have been 1938, so I was only a year old. And actually, they were quite nice. I have vague memories of Russian officers coming to our house for dinner. And my father was still practicing and all that. But then when Hitler marched into Poland full time, I mean, he just ignored the pact and marched in on September 1st, 1939. The Russians, as I said, retreated back to Russia. And very soon after Warsaw was taken, we were invaded by Germans.
So go back to that now, as the Germans invaded and things started to change, and now, you're getting a little bit more cognizant, you're getting a little bit older. Try to go back to your earliest memories of what that was like. This is before you know, you went into the ghetto before, you went into hiding, when you were still out. What did it look like with the Germans now in there?
Well, I must tell you that at first I have memories of German officers coming to dinner to our house. So that was one very remote memory, and talking about how they were against what Hitler was doing in our house. But that didn't last very long. Very soon after, again, my uh, timing is a little off because I was too young. But I remember German SS coming into the house and telling my mother, feeling her. By the way, all the Jewish ladies were called Sarah. Sarah. Everybody was Sarah. And told her to, somebody felled her up, and apparently she had put all her jewelry into her girdle. So I was actually, they sent me out of the room, my parents, and she had to take off her girdle and, you know, give away her jewelry. And when I came back into the room later on after they left, I saw a red gash on my mother's head that somebody had hit her with a gun in the head. And it all started. They started actions. First, there was people who were disabled, all elderly people. They started collecting them, making them meet in the center of town. They led them up the hills into the woods. And apparently, of course, I wasn't there, but they were shot. And then there was an action where they told all the intellectuals and all the educated people, Jews, to meet in the center of town. And I had two cousins. Being the youngest, I was the youngest of that generation. And so I was little, but I knew my cousins. And one cousin had just graduated from medical school in Prague, and his sister was a pharmacist. And he had just gotten married, and his wife was, I think, was a pharmacist as well. And they all went, but my father, for some reason, was smart enough to know that he shouldn't go. And he told my mother not to go. And he ended up in the countryside seeing his patients. And I think he asked my mother to just absent herself with me. And so we never went. And these people who were all, there were dozens of them who did meet in the center of town. We never heard from them again. So I remember that. Never heard from them again. They must have been taken out of town and shot.
So what, talk about
I
your,
started to tell you about the actions. There were constant actions for one thing or another. And finally we ended up in the ghetto with
so talk about that. How did that happen? How did you move into the ghetto? What do you remember about that?
Well, all I remember is that we lived in the ghetto in a small town cottage with three other families actually in one room. One of them, she was a young woman, she was a dentist, and she was pregnant. I don't know where her husband was, that I don't remember, and her parents. So we lived in one room with, there were three of us and three of them. So there were six of us in one room. And they had organized some kind of a hiding place in the attic, just in case there were actions. They knew already what was coming. And the way they knew that an action was coming was that they could hear truck noise, trucks being driven from a larger city called Tarnopol. And they could hear them on the road, and they knew that German soldiers were coming. So one night my mother was on guard, because every night somebody else was on guard listening for the trucks. And my mother was on guard, and she got everybody awake, and we all went up into the attic, a hiding place. And then we heard them coming into the house looking for us, but they never checked the attic, so we survived in the attic. So I remember that, and this went on. There were constant actions. My father was still allowed to leave the ghetto because, being a physician, there were a lot of epidemics, typhus and typhoid, and you name it. So he was still able to go out and treat patients. And one day he was walking in town, and an old lady that she knew him, approached him, and she said to him, "Doctor, I wonder if you could come and see my little granddaughter. She's 2 months old and she's blind." and maybe you could see her and you could do something. So he said, okay, I'll come tonight. And he went there that night and he put some salve on her eyes. He made his own medications because there was nothing available, pharmacies or anything like that. And he put some salve on her eyes and he told the lady, I'll come back tomorrow to check on her. And he came back and he put some more salve on her eyes and she opened her eyes. And of course, the old lady, the grandma, and the baby's daughter was so grateful to him because they really thought she was blind. Meanwhile, she probably just had an infection from birth canal or whatever. Anyhow, so the lady said to him, is there anything I could do for your doctor? And he said, well, would you be willing to hide my wife and my daughter and me at some point? And she said, well,
What was her name? What was her name, the grandma?
Helena. You have that
I have a
picture.
picture of her.
Yes,
Yeah.
there it is, Helena.
And what was her daughter's name?
Daughter's name, Jadwiga, Polish name Jadzia. We used to call her Jadzia. She was quite beautiful. She looked like Marlene Dietrich. She was absolutely gorgeous. Her husband was a Polish pilot who was in England. He was one of the pilots that flew during D-Day, flew from England back to the mainland. But she was so gorgeous. And we were at her house was actually their house. It was a cottage. It was a one-room cottage with a big,
I have a picture of that too.
Yeah.
Hard to see.
Little cottage, like the ones with the thatched roofs that you've seen in just a thatched roof, one room with, that's better, much better. Yeah, that's it. With a garden and a chicken coop. And it was one room with a big oven where they made their own bread. And
how did you guys move there? Like, how did you move from out of the ghetto into there without being found out?
Well, I had been sent out of the ghetto originally with one of the nannies who took me. My father paid her, and somehow or other, he probably paid off the guards. I don't know. I'm guessing. But he got me out of the ghetto. And he met her in the park, and she took me away for a few, I don't know how long. All I remember is being with her out of town because I would have been recognized. I remember waking up at night, I used to hear shooting all the time. And I knew it was Jews being shot out of town, and I was throwing up, and I was about 4 or 5, I don't know. And anyway, at some point, she notified my father that her husband objected to her being at whatever it was, that he has to take me back. By then, he must have already taken my mother out of the ghetto. Again, I don't know how he took her out. Again, I'm guessing that he paid off the guards, or maybe they just let her take. But in the middle of the night, she went into hiding into the chicken coop at Helena's house. And I remember her coming in the middle of the night. I was with my father because the nanny had brought me back to my father in a park somewhere, on a park bench. And they exchanged me, and she took me back to her house, and I saw my mother. I hadn't seen my mother in so long.
Went back to Helena's house and to the chicken coop. What did that look like, this chicken coop where your mother was and where you were brought to?
You know, earth, there was no floor. The floor was an earthen floor. And there were shelves for chickens, and they laid their eggs. And one of the chickens.
Like, how many chickens were in there?
Maybe 20 chickens. And my father, wait a minute, I'm going too fast because my father was not with us. We were alone, my mother and I. And we really didn't know where my father was. And the ghetto finally was raised. It was Judenfrei. It was declared Judenfrei. Whatever Jews that got there, they got out of there and they raised it. And we knew about it because Helena.
So when you say they raised the ghetto, did they burn it down? Did they how did they destroy it?
Right. They destroyed all the buildings and burned it down, whatever. They knocked it down.
And presumably then anybody who was left there was taken to a concentration camp or to the woods or?
No. Yeah, both,
okay.
Probably. And anyhow, we didn't know where my father was. And one night in the middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning, we heard scratching at the door, and it was my father. And he had gone into the countryside and slowly, slowly made his way back to us. And then we stayed together, the three of us. And the ironic thing was that we were across the street from the SS headquarters. And of course, who would even think that there would be Jews hiding under their noses? And of course, the daughter, Yadviga, you saw the picture. She was absolutely gorgeous. So they wouldn't leave her alone. They used to come to that big room where we sat, separated by a wall. And they would come and visit her and bring food. I mean, we had so much food, they didn't know that we were eating their German food. We always had a load of food because they could make sure. Of course, we had chickens, we had eggs. She had a garden, so we were never for want of food. We had plenty of food. But I got a cold and I started coughing, and they didn't know what to do with me because they also had neighbors coming in to visit. So what they did with me is they put me in the big room into the lady, because they slept together, the mother and daughter and the baby. They put me in the bed there with my head turned against the wall, and I wasn't supposed to turn around, which I was smart enough to know. And they said that I was a cousin from the countryside and that I was sick and had to be in town. And so I stayed there. I don't know how long, but I stayed there with my head against the wall whenever anybody came. And then, of course, I went back into the chicken coop and we slept.
How did you stay warm? I mean, this is Poland. It must have been freezing there. How did you stay warm?
It was very cold in the winter, yeah. Well, my father, we had clothes with us. Apparently, my parents must have brought. And also my father, out of straw, made floor pads, and he made me boots. And my mother, he wove boots out of straw. And we had a straw curtain and that he made. And we sat there all day long, and they taught me how to read. I learned to read very young, and they taught me stories of the Bible and all kinds of fairy tales, and they kept me occupied. And I also had a chicken that was my pet, and that chicken responded actually to my commands.
Did he have a name?
I can't remember, probably did. But it was missing a toe that had been hit by a bullet at one time. So I knew which one was my chicken. And anyway, one day we were just sitting quietly, and all of a sudden one of the German dogs, German shepherds, started chasing a chicken and into the chicken coop. It took seconds before, I mean, they were well trained, those dogs, let me tell you. The officer whistled, and the dog turned around and went back. He would have found us immediately. And actually, I was outside the curtain. But I guess he just ignored me or whatever, went back, and the officer never came in because it was dirty, it was chickens, you know. So he wasn't coming into the chicken coop. That's a well-known fact that German people are very clean. And he wasn't coming into a dirty, schmutzige chicken coop. So he got the dog out of there, and that was pretty scary, let me tell you. It was pretty close.
So talk about how you got out of there as the war was coming to an end. How did you guys come out of hiding?
What happened was that we heard bombing and all kinds of tanks and artillery, and the front was moving. Russians were coming in and pushing Germans out that whole area. And one early morning, probably at dawn, we heard the word Tovarish in the garden, and Tovarish means comrade in Russian. So we came out of there, and they knew right away who we were. I mean, we started hugging and kissing, and it was a whole big party there, crying naturally. And I had, by the way, lost my voice because I was not allowed to speak for so many months. We were there, I'm guessing, about 9 months in hiding, because I remember summer and I remember Christmas there, because again, we got so much food from the Germans. We were well fed, and we were liberated exactly. And that I remember on March 4th, 1944. March 4th, 1944, we were liberated by the Russians. But then the front started moving back. The Germans were
You were about 7 years old.
Yeah, I was 7, yeah.
Okay.
And the front started moving back. So we ran away with the Russian army. We ran, and it was March in Poland. The roads were not paved. The snow had melted. It was all mud. It was huge, deep mud. And we ran with the tanks and the soldiers and the horses and, just to get away from the Germans. And well, there's another story with one of my cousins survived.
So let's talk about your cousin, because I have here, this is the family tree on your father's side, right?
Okay, yes.
So there were the 7 siblings across the top there, right?
Yes.
And then, so of them, the ones in yellow died in the Holocaust. And the ones in white, one of them's your dad, Marcus, he survived, and then 2 of his sisters survived.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, one survived in the United States. She had left Vienna and managed to go through China to get to the United States. So she was in the States, and another sister survived. She lived in Paris. Her husband was a furrier in Paris from the 1930s, and they managed to get themselves into Marseille, which was part of Free France under Pétain, Marshal Pétain. So they survived in Marseille under Aryan papers, but they survived there. There was no German occupation there.
So of the 7 siblings, right?
Yeah.
4 of them died, and then 3 survived. Your dad and the 2 sisters survived.
Yes.
And here's you as the only child, and then his name was Febish, right?
Feb was the oldest brother.
His kids died.
Right.
Of his 3 kids, 2 died and 1 survived. That's Saul, right?
Yes. So, yeah.
And then there's you. And then this is Michelle, the cousin you were going to talk about, right?
Right.
And his parents died, and he survived.
Yes.
So talk about when you were reunited with him when you came out of hiding, and then what happened with him.
Well, it turned out
How did he survive, by the way?
Yes. His parents were shot, and he was led out of town with his parents to be shot. And he was 15. He managed to get away, and his mother did see him run away. And that was the last sight that she had of him, that hopefully he would survive. And my father was still at liberty at that time. So my father made arrangements for his nephew to go to a barber in a small village way out of town. And my father gave him money, and my cousin, and he said, you go there because you can't go into hiding with us. There wasn't enough room. And besides, the lady was afraid to have him there because whatever she needed to buy for us, it would be too much and people would be suspicious if they had a teenager there. So when my father joined us that night, Michelle, his name was Munio in Polish, he went to the countryside looking for the barber when my father told him to follow the stars. It was the month of August, I think. And he followed the stars and he got into this little hamlet. And he didn't know where the house was. So there was a young woman walking a dog. So he stopped her and he asked her, he said, would you know where Barbara's house is? And she said, yes, she pointed it out to him. And he went over there and he knocked on the door, and the barber opened the door and he said, I know who you are, you're Dr. Schmeich's nephew, but I can't keep you here. So there is this young boy, and his parents are dead. He knows where we were, but he would never, go there. He didn't know what to do. And he's sitting there really crying, and there's a knock on the door. And the young woman who showed him where to go comes in, and she says, is there anything I can do? Because she figured it out right away what this whole situation was, if I can help. So the barber told her the story that he can't take him. And she said, well, let me go to my house and I'll speak to my father-in-law, who's our family patriarch, and my husband, and we'll see if we can help. And she came back and she told him, come with me, we're gonna hide you. Now, this is a total stranger. Didn't know. She had 3 children.
Wow.
And if they had been caught, they all would have been shot.
Wow. So so the Russians come in, and he comes to the house with
all of it. Now, in the meantime, while we were in hiding, Helena comes to my father and she said, I saw a whole lot of Jews being let out of town, and one of them was your nephew, and he was shot as well. So as far as my father was concerned, he was killed, and he adored his nephew. He practically raised him. So he sat Shiva with him with ashes in his head and all that. And then all of a sudden, when the Russian liberators, who shows up but my cousin? Oh. And he was 16 at the time. Anyway, once we started escaping with the Russians, he joined us, of course. And he never let me forget that I was such a skinny little nothing that he had to carry me on his back because I would drown in the mud. So he always used to remind me, I carried you on my back.
So I just want to pivot real quickly. Whatever happened to your mother's family? Where did all her brothers and sisters and their children end up? What happened to them?
I don't know. Only one nephew survived. One nephew survived because he went with the Russians. He was the oldest. He was 20 years old, and he ended up in Russia. When the Russians in 1938 went back to Russia, he went with them.
So they all died. You just don't know how. So there were 7 of them, right?
Right.
7 siblings, and she's the only one of the siblings who survived.
Right. Exactly.
And then all their children died except for you, right? You survived.
Right.
And then this is the one that you said that went to Russia, too, right?
Correct.
So they all died.
They all died.
Wow.
Well, you know, there's a list of them, I think, at Yad Vashem.
Yeah, that's where I got this, actually.
Yeah. They all perished. I don't know where, probably Auschwitz, but I'm not sure. And
then just to be real quick, so the people who saved you and your family and hid you guys,
yes,
right?
Mother and daughter, correct.
So talk a little bit about the Righteous Among Nations Award that is given out and about them getting this award.
Yeah, okay. In 2015, see, we had lost, my father kept in touch with them in the United States, and they were in Poland. He used to send packages all the time to them, you know, whatever they wanted, medications, whatever, once we came to the United States. But somehow or other, after my dad died, I lost the contact. So I didn't know where they were and who had survived. I think the old lady had died, and I knew about that. But the daughter and her children and her husband, who came back from England, I had lost track of them. So I get an email from the Israeli embassy in Warsaw in 2015 that they had made contact with the descendants of Yaja and her mother. And they lived in free Poland now. They were not under Russian because the part of Poland where I was born is the Ukraine now. So, but they lived in the part of Poland that's Poland now. So would I be willing to get in touch with them? And of course, no, would I allow the embassy to get in touch with them? And I said, of course, I'd love it. So within a week, maybe less, I got an email from the grandson, from Yaja's son, who was born after the war. She only had the one little daughter who became Lodja, who also moved to Free Poland. She had just died in January, and this was April that I'm talking about. And he got in touch with me, and we started corresponding, and he sent me those pictures that you have now. He was the one who sent me those pictures. And he sent me a lot of information about the fact that her mother had written. I didn't know about this business with the baby that was blind. His mother had written all about that and how my father got in touch with her mother and how they decided to hide us.
What's the Righteous Among Nations Award? What is that?
Well, there is an area in Israel that planted trees and plaques to honor all the different families who saved Jewish people during the war. And that family, the award was given when you were in Poland with us. We all went, the whole family went in April of 2015 to meet the family, meet Maximilian and his son and a nephew, the whole family. We met them and we had a wonderful time with them. They met us in Krakow. We all met in Krakow.
I want to just close it out by, because we've got about 20 minutes and I want to give people time to ask
Yeah,
questions.
of course,
But
absolutely.
I just want to close it out with you talking about coming to the United States. How did you get out of Poland and end up in the United States?
Well, I'll make it fast to let the kids talk. We got out of Poland. We went from where we were, our town, we ran away after when the Russians were under Russian occupation. This was 1944 to 1945. We were okay. We got our house back. My father was the head of the polyclinic there. And then one night we were banging on the door. The Russian soldiers, we heard Jews have gold. So they went through the house. They started going through the bricks of butter, everything. So at that point, my father made a decision. That's it. We're not staying here anymore. So we waited for a train for 2 weeks, and the train ran. Finally, a train came, and my cousin Munyuk, he joined us, and we all headed towards part of Poland that was not under Russian occupation. It was communist, but it wasn't under Russian occupation. And my father started a practice there. Primarily venereal diseases. We had a nice apartment, probably gotten from a German doctor who ran away. I don't know, but I'm guessing because there were medical furniture there and everything. And we were doing okay. I was going to school. It was my first grade really under Polish occupation. I learned Polish writing and reading and whatever, and we were good. And then one day I come back from school and my mother had gone to Warsaw. I know that. She came back and she said, we're leaving. And we left everything and we took off and we ended up in Czechoslovakia. We went by train, took several weeks to get there. We ended up in a DP camp. And my mother
What's
and
a
I,
DP camp?
DP is Displaced Persons Camp.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there, and all I remember from there, two things. My mother and I were in the women's camp. My father was in the men's camp. He would come and get me during the day, and he took me to see all the sights of Prague, which are gorgeous, the castle and beautiful city that was not damaged by the war. And during the night, we stayed up all night with the lights on to pick bed bugs off our bodies. So that was what I remember from Czechoslovakia's DP camp. Bed bugs were all over the place. So from there, we managed to get ourselves into France because my father wanted to see his sister who had survived, and she and her husband and daughter had gone back to Paris, and they had their big apartment there. So we joined them in Paris, and from there, we waited for 5 years to get a visa to come to the United States. And let me tell you, seeing the Statue of Liberty early morning was quite a sight.
So you were on a ship?
I'm crying again about it. So that was it. I mean, there were a lot of things that happened in between, of course. We lived in Paris for 5 years.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to take questions now. If people want to just type in their questions on the chat, and I will read them out.
Okay.
Please, guys, please go ahead and put some questions in. And I got a picture of my mom. This is in
That's in Poland after the war.
after the war?
The hair. Every morning I had to have my hair done like that.
Okay, any questions? I'm not seeing any questions come up. Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and recount your experiences so openly. My question, how did you cope emotionally with your Holocaust experiences? And how did you retain hope?
Well, you have to understand that I survived with both my parents. So it's a big deal because I always felt no matter what, they would take care of me. So I was not as scarred as some other children, survivors who lost their parents. And so that always, my father was like the pillar of stone for me. He was there. I knew nothing would ever happen with my father and my mother, especially my father, who planned everything meticulously and worked it out. So we were able to survive. So my emotion, I have scarring. There's no question about emotional, but not to the point where it deterred me from having a normal life.
Okay, I'm not getting any other questions here, so I'm going to throw some out at you myself. So what are some of the lessons from that period? If you were now to fast forward to these students at Rollins now who are getting ready to go out into the world and take over the world and run this world. What do you want them to know from this? What do they need to learn?
They need to learn to be aware of the miseries that happen to people all over the world who are helpless, and they should, with all this electronic stuff that they have now, they should become active and prevent anything like that genocide that happened to me, to us, to the Jewish people who had wonderful lives, who were educated, interested, helping, to be butchered the way they were, and they were butchered. And young people should really become very alert to things like that and do whatever they can to prevent it from happening again.
And this question's from Vivian. Thank you for sharing your life with us. How did you adjust to life in the United States, and when did you feel comfortable to speak about your hiding experiences?
Very good question, by the way. Very good question. I did not like the schools here particularly. I went to school for 5 years in France, and I loved school there. I loved it. We were separate, girls and were separate from boys. Education was the only thing that we were interested in. We wore uniforms in a public school, so there was no talk about clothes. We all had the same clothes. It was very, very good. I loved French schools, and I loved, of course, I speak French fluently. And when I came to the United States, I found I came as a teenager, 14 years old, and all the girls talked about in school were boys and clothes and things like that. And I couldn't deal with that. First of all, I didn't have the right clothes. So that was, 14-year-old girl, clothes are important, but I didn't have, my parents didn't have the funds for it, whatever. And they were not really interested in getting good grades or anything like that. They were just interested in flirting with boys and having a good time. It was a little bit difficult for me to adjust. But I did okay, and I graduated in 3.5 years high school, and then of course I went to college after that. So
when did you start feeling comfortable talking about your hiding experience?
That's a good question. We never talked about it. We never talked about it. That's a very good question. It didn't come out till Schindler's List came out. The movie Schindler's List. Other than that, we never talked about it at home. We spoke Polish at home. My father got his medical license here. My mother went back to teaching. And that's all. We were busy with our lives. I was going to school. I had boyfriends, whatever. And we never talked about it. When Schindler's List came out, then questions started coming out. And then I started, in school, by then I was already working in a high school and on Long Island, and the questions started coming out. So I spoke to a lot of the classes and told them my experiences. But till then, and that was in I think, if I'm not mistaken.
1990s?
Yeah.
Wow. And this question's from Hannah, and she wants to know, was your family observant? And if so, how did you observe holidays or Jewish traditions?
Not really. My father came from an Orthodox family, but my mother didn't. And they were totally assimilated. She was very much involved with Jewish culture. She spoke Hebrew fluently. She was in the Herzl Association. Her sister went on her honeymoon to Palestine, but it was not religious as much as cultural. So by the time they married, my mother, of course, wasn't doing much religious. I mean, we celebrated holidays like Pesach and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, of course. And my father went to shul, but I don't remember my mother ever going to shul with him.
This is a related question. This is from Allie. It's related, but it's a little bit of a different twist on it. So how do you think your relationship with your faith has been affected by your experiences?
Well, I'm not overly religious either, and I still question that God allowed this to happen. It really is, it's painful for me to think that God, if there is a God, would have allowed what happened to us. Now, a lot of religious people still believe that God, it's not God's fault. No, but God supposedly created Adam and Eve and humans. And how could he have allowed this to happen to a whole generation, many generations of people, to let them suffer like that? So, I mean, I'm a Jew. I consider myself a Jew. I've gone for holidays. I observe Passover and Hanukkah, of course, with my grandchildren because they have to have their gifts. But I'm not overly religious. No.
And this question comes from Maggie. She says, I've loved hearing you speak to us, and it is so appreciated. When you were in hiding, did you know that Jews were being taken into concentration camps, or did you not learn about the camps until after the war?
I think there were suspicions, but most of the time from our town, Jews were taken into the woods, into the backwoods. This was a rural area of Poland, and there were a lot of woods and a lot of, and the Ukrainians, by the way, the Germans gave the orders at the mass shootings. The Germans gave the orders, and they had Ukrainians did all the shooting. So that's a well-known fact. And as far as concentration camps, there were rumors. There were rumors. As a matter of fact, when we were still in our house, there was a German refugee. I still remember what he looked like. He was very fat. Anyway, he somehow or other escaped from Germany and ended up in our house. And he used to talk about that he knew about the concentration camps because had also survived Kristallnacht. I don't know if you know what Kristallnacht was. Horrible nights of destruction of Jewish synagogues, and in all over Germany, the orders were given to destroy Jewish stores and kill people and a lot. So he knew about all that. So he was talking about it. So I don't know what happened to him eventually, but when we went to the ghetto, I don't know. He wasn't with us in the ghetto, so I don't know what happened to him.
So this question is from Brenda, and she says, Suzanne, you're amazing. Your memory to recall your childhood details and displacement camp as you waited 5 years to come to America to see the Statue of Liberty, #freedom. Please share your career experiences and raising your children in America as a Holocaust survivor.
Again, I blanked it out. It wasn't part of my, I don't know, ask my daughter. Did I talk about it? Did I talk about it? No, I don't think so. Lisa?
I think from my perspective, I think there was a definite sense of we have to stay with our own people, almost a sense of fear of integrating with other people because maybe mistrust. And so I feel like we were raised, we were intentionally in a neighborhood where a lot of people around us were Jews.
Correct.
We were encouraged to stay with our own people. And I think, I don't know if that preceded the Holocaust or that was caused by the Holocaust, but there was always that, the motto that was shared, which was that we would never let it happen again, and that we were always kind of distrustful of people from the outside, if I had to say.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, I remember. That's true. That's all true what you're saying. Well, yeah, we did live in an area that was primarily Jewish on Great Neck on Long Island. So that's true. That's true.
This question is from Vivian, and I think it's the last question here. And she says, is there any historical or modern views of the Holocaust that you disagree with today?
Actually, first of all, I'm not generalizing that all Germans were bad, because I told you we had officers in our dining room who were totally in disagreement with what was going on. So I can't say, as a matter of fact, after the war, I went back to Germany twice. I was able to handle it. One for reasons to get reparations, so I had to be examined by a psychiatrist in Germany, and one just for pleasure. So I can't blame all people, all Germans. But what was the other question?
Well, that is actually one question. How do you feel about German products? But the question was, are there any historical or modern views of the Holocaust that you disagree with? Because now people debate over, did the Holocaust happen, or it happened this way versus that way? Are there any views of it that you disagree with?
Any views that I disagree with? Yeah. The Holocaust did happen. And whatever they're thinking, they also say the coronavirus isn't happening. So, you always have these maniacs who find that they're smarter than anybody else. It's too bad that didn't go through the Holocaust. Then they would know that it was there. As a matter of fact, the school that I worked at, Um, do we have any time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Young teacher was hired there, and she had some kind of a thing on the back of her car. I don't know what it was, but anyway, one of the students in the school checked with his grandpa to find out what that meant, and the grandpa found out that it was a Holocaust deniers, and that you know, and she was part of the group that were denied. There she is teaching in a primarily Jewish high school on Long Island. She gets a great job because the salaries were very good for teachers there. She was a music teacher, and she has that on the back of her car. You can imagine that the assistant principal, who was also Jewish, was contacted immediately. He called ADL. ADL checked out on whatever that association was, and she was on her out of the school the next day.
I do have one more question. This is from Rachel, and you know, she had heard your story about sleeping above the oven and your dad with the bricks. Tell that story.
Okay. Every day now, my father used to come to visit the baby. He brought a brick in his medical case. Now, the oven looks the best way I can describe it, it was like a pizza oven. It was a big round opening. And then they used to bake their bread there every week because they made their own bread. Not because they were gourmet cooks or anything like that. It's because there were no bakeries to buy bread from. So they made their own bread. And anyway, we for us to sleep, we didn't sleep in the chicken coop. We would get out of the chicken coop, go around, bent over so nobody would see us, and go inside the one room, and we would climb into the oven. And what my father had done, because there was like an opening between the oven and the ceiling, he had bricked it all up from the bricks that he brought there. So when we got inside, there was a mattress on top, and that's where we slept. There were steps in the oven. He put in steps. So we climbed up the steps in the flue, and we climbed up and we slept in the top of the oven.
Wow.
When they baked once a week, I can tell you, it was pretty hot in there.
And you mentioned reparations. Do you get reparations from the German government?
I get reparations from Germany.
How long have you been getting reparations, and how much do they send?
I'm not telling you that. But they started in I was in Germany in 1965 to be examined, and I got a back pay from whenever we were occupied, and then I get a monthly stipend into my bank account.
I'm going to take this as the last question, and it's kind of a repeat, but I think it's an important last question. So this is from Kelsey, and she says, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I'm an education major. So what do you think is the most important lesson from the Holocaust that we can teach young students today?
Well, first of all, they should hear about it. That's number one, because it's such an incredible story that it's not to be believed that it really happened. To the degree that it happened, it was so organized. It was so specific. Everything was meticulously done that the children they don't have to hear about all the horrors if they're very young children. That may give them nightmares. Incidentally, I had nightmares for a long time too. I mean, that was part of my inheritance from the Holocaust. But anyway, you shouldn't frighten them, but you should just make them aware that humans can be very destructive to other human beings. And I'm sure a lot of these children have pets, and you don't see a dog kill another dog or a cat kill another for food, or maybe for food if they're starving, but not just for the sheer pleasure of it. It's just, they don't do it. And yet human beings have done that to each other. And that is incomprehensible that people can do that. Instead of being good to each other and helping each other wherever they can, they just try to, for no reason really, maybe jealousy, I don't know. There's no explanation for this kind of a behavior, none whatsoever. And the irony of the whole thing was that if Germany had not done it to the Jewish population there, who were really the top of the rung, they were educated, Einstein, many of the great scientists, many escaped from Germany. Had they stayed in Germany, the German Jews considered themselves German first, then Jewish. They would have helped if Hitler would have used them. They would have helped. They would have remained patriotic and helped Hitler. He lost the war. One of the reasons he lost, except from his marching into Russia, was the kiss of death anyway. But the fact that he got rid of the elite of his medical doctors, his lawyers, everybody, he got rid of them. They ran away. A lot of them, of course, left Germany in the 30s because they knew what was coming. They saw it in front of their eyes. See, we were in Poland in a little town. So we heard, you know, we didn't have TV, we didn't have internet, we didn't. So it was just hearsay. People would mention it, but nobody would believe it. So that's it. The children just have to know that they have to be good to each other and no bullying in the schools.
Well, thank you. That's such an appropriate way to end this one. I'm going to pivot over to Judith. I don't know, Judith, if you want to have some last words or, yeah, go ahead.
Suzanne and Lisa, both of you, mother and daughters, women of valor, as they say, you know, you women are just such a reminder of the strength of the Jewish people, really. Survivors, teachers, willing to dialogue and learn from each other and from others. This was an incredible story, and I just hope it's the beginning of a wonderful relationship and friendship with you as Orlandians and as teachers. And so on behalf of our students and my co-teacher, Jim McLaughlin, I just want to thank you so much, and Rachel as well for putting it all together today. This was just so inspiring. I mean, it's not only a reminder, right, of the horrors, but it really is a reminder of the spirit that some people have, like you know, like the righteous Gentiles, right? The people that not all people are horrible, right? And
that's right.
And some can do amazing things and are so daring in their humanity and generosity.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
So
I'd like to say two things. One is that we were, Suzanne, when we were going to Krakow, we were going to meet with the survivor who was associated with the Jewish Community Center in Krakow. And that trip was canceled 2 days before we were supposed to leave.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then Auschwitz was closed, by the way, a day later.
Will you take
that Jewish Community Center in Krakow, that's where we went and awarded the family, the Righteous Among Nations Award, right in that building.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Was Jonathan there? It would have been Jonathan, right?
There was, I'll have to send you. My mother has the information.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I remember the family, you know, that part I remember.
So having the chance to speak with you, Suzanne, makes up for the fact that, more than makes up for the fact that we did not have a chance to speak with a Polish woman who was a survivor in Krakow. And it's especially fitting that you went to Krakow.
Oh yeah, we went to Krakow. We met the mayor of Krakow. We met the American ambassador. We met the Israeli ambassador. They were all there. It was a fabulous ceremony.
That's amazing.
The other thing I wanted to say is that, as you noted, we have some education majors. And in addition, probably almost all of these young women are going to be parents at some point. And so they will be teachers. They will be teachers of their own children, if not other people's children. And so listening to you and hearing your story, and you being involved with education in Long Island for all those years, this is really wonderful. It's so important. And the reason that Judith and I created this course is because there was nothing like it at Rollins College. There was nothing like it. And there ought to be at every college in this country, there ought to be courses about the Holocaust and about where we go from here. So,
you know, Jim, what surprises me that there was not a young man in the group. They were all women.
Well,
That's
you know, I have an explanation for it. There were several young men who applied for this course in field study,
Yes.
but not nearly as many women. And so, you know, it's actually a statistic that most women students are the ones who apply for field studies abroad, which is interesting. It's just in and of itself. Also, women, you know, young women at Rollins seem to do actually better academically. And so, yeah, and we were just so fortunate with the 12 students that that chose us, and we chose them to be part of this, our amazing community of learners this semester.
That's wonderful.
I will say though, Suzanne, I'm sorry that there are no young men in the course.
I mean, I am too, Frank.
I think it's unfortunate because they're not learning. They're not learning some of the most important.
I was really
historical-
surprised when I heard all names were girls, ladies,
Yeah.
young ladies, and not one single
Yeah.
young man.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens. We're going to teach
Yeah,
this
we'll-
every semester, every year, every spring, Suzanne, we will teach this course, and Rachel and everybody.
Okay.
You teach
Anytime
them.
you want me to come and speak to you at school, I'll be happy to do it.
That's
Oh,
fantastic.
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving me.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
And
Thank you,
Rachel,
Lisa.
of
Thank you,
course, I'm more than
Suzanne.
grateful.
Thanks, Rachel.
you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Rachel. Thank
And
you
Lisa,
so much.
the other Lisa that's not there right now.
Yeah.
But
And I do want to say that Rita sent me an email
yeah.
apologizing for not being able to join, but something came up for her. But she was very appreciative of the invitation.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day.
You
Be well.
too.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.